Good evening, Region. All right, so continuing the series, Lies I Learned at Home, this is the one this week. Watching TV too close to the screen will damage your eyes. Who heard that? Okay. Not true. My grandchildren can sit as close to the TV as they want, and it doesn't do any damage at all. Now, there's blue light that comes out of the TV, and that could cause problems. Well, then they shouldn't be too close. Good news for you. If the blue light's a problem, proximity to the screen makes no difference. Now, if you want to keep lying to your kids about this, that's okay too. As adults, it's not lies, it's called pretending, okay? Fair enough, and that's what we'll do. All right. Going through this, why we believe lies, and we've talked about this in past weeks, and you can check it out on YouTube if you're getting caught up on our station. But basically, the description that really is the creepiest for me about Satan, not that he's a lion trying to devour me, it's this: he's the father of lies, like lies are his children. And that's the world we live in. But after that, we are born into a world that continually lies to us. And that could be media, that could be people, that could be religion, right? So it's continually lying to you. And if you think that you're smart enough to figure it out, you have a propensity in you, even if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, called your flesh, is called your sarx, which has a predisposition to believe the lies and won't let go of them. Because if it was easy as just believing what's true, you just throw out some facts and people, oh, that's true, and they get on with their life. But your flesh is a lot stronger than you think it is, and the fact you think that it's not that strong is the lie you're believing. So that's why we have the propensity for it. But going through this on families, and this is going to be really important tonight, so I'm going to just get to the point and be direct. I want this balance, and first, and I was talking to somebody earlier, what is blame? Blame's the drug we take to feel good that ruins our lives. So if you go through a series like this, my dad did that, my mom did that, this was my home, that, and it's blame, it makes you feel better for a second, but later, you're still stuck. Makes sense? So why do you study it? To learn the lie, but don't turn to blame, turn to other things. But this one tonight's very important, and I'll get to this lie. Sometimes we need distance from previous relationships in our life. And I'm not going to hamper on this, but most of you know I oversee the counseling here. You do not need to reconcile with people who raped you. You do not need to reconcile with people who sexually abused you. So when you hear a series like this, it's not that we're going to reconcile with everyone in our life, okay? That's the reason I say that every time going through this, okay? Because the stories we hear through the counseling center, at times, they are horrible, okay? So that's what we're talking about. But overwhelmingly, if you're in Region, and overwhelmingly with the relationships in your life, we do need to maintain relationships. So what's the lie this week? I'm safe when I cut people off, okay? Now, there's some, I should say I enjoy teaching every night because, I like the lesson, but tonight, I'm into it, all right? Because there's a lot of verbiage I hear, and I pretty much got off Facebook completely because it's only good for one thing, showing pictures of my grandchildren to my parents. But other than that, there's nothing meaningful about it for me, okay? Now, why do I say that? Because I got so tired of seeing all the pop psychology posts from Christians that were horrible. So here we go, all right? So this is totally my flesh. All the toes I step on tonight, it is intentional, all right? 1992, one of the best books ever written. I love these guys. Well, hold on a second. Let me back up here. I kind of get ahead of myself. Why do we cut people off? Okay? What I mean is, I'm done with you. I don't want you in my life. I'm not going to have a relationship with you. Why do we do that? And I always teach you there's a payoff for it. But number one, usually they're people we have conflict with, so I could avoid conflict. Or I avoid interpersonal growth, meaning these people I feel make me feel a certain way. And I don't like how they make me feel. The final one is this: I get to avoid humility. What? Where do we learn this? And it's not intentional, but If you grew up in a home where no conflict is modeled, you never learn how to do conflict. What would that home be? My parents were perfect. They never had a fight. They always got along. There was always peace. That means one of a few things. They hid it from you. One of them beat the other one down so much they just gave up. Amen? Amen. Or basically, they lived completely separate lives and had no investment in each other. Okay? But when you look at it, no conflict modeled or unhealthy conflict modeled. What's that? A fight. Passive aggressiveness. Slamming of cabinet doors. Going out of the house for the long drive. And it's funny, you're pretty young when you can pick up on it as a kid, even subconsciously if you don't know what's happening. This isn't modeled well. Next after that, relationships easily dispensed with. Your parents or the people in your life just go from one thing to another, one person to another. Or no real teaching of skills for connection. So the only teaching was, tell your sibling you're sorry. Well, that's it, which is a good thing to learn, but no real skills. So in the end, when we have these things for long enough and we can't do conflict and we can't do difficult relationships, we cut people off. But what's the word you think we all use now when we cut people off? We have what? Boundaries. Yes, here it is. 1992. I love the book. I love this book. Cloud and Townsend, their money. I have been out to their leadership training in California. Yes, great. And highly recommend the book, everything in the book. But what happened with time, and boundaries existed before this, but they wrote it for a Christian audience and everyone grabbed a hold of it. But with time, what they taught as boundaries became misconstrued for cutting people out of our lives. Okay? And we call it what? Boundaries. Literally, social media is littered with people. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm not going to let you do this. I'm not out of my life. This is the boundary. If you don't behave this way around me, I'm not going to be around you. It's called boundaries. No, that's called being a child with no relationship skills. Okay? So when you go through it, the study, and you look at what Cloud said, and I'm just going to put it out here, boundaries define us. What is a boundary? They define what is me and what is not me. A boundary shows me where I end and someone else begins, leading me to a sense of ownership. Knowing what I am to own and take responsibility for gives me freedom. Taking responsibility for my life opens up many different options. Boundaries helps us keep the good in and the bad out. Setting boundaries inevitably involves taking responsibility for your choices. You are the one who makes them. You are the one who must live with their consequences, and you are the one who may be keeping yourself from making the choices you could be happy with. We must own our own thoughts and clarify distorted thinking. So let me pick on somebody who would be my volunteer for... Mike, come on up. Yes. All right. Give him a hand. So often, you'll hear it taught, what are boundaries and what they're not. So, basically, I want to picture, this is a fence, and Mike is in his yard. And I am in my yard. Fair enough? This is a boundary, and I'm going to say this for point of illustration. In an understanding of boundaries, Mike and I still have a relationship. Okay? I haven't built a 20-foot high cement wall to get rid of Mike. Fair enough? I haven't done that. So basically, Mike has his yard, and I have my what? Yard. All of a sudden, there's some weeds in my yard. Hey, Mike, I'm kind of ticked at you because there's some weeds in my yard. It's a real simple understanding. Who's responsible for my yard? You. Oh. Mike comes to me and says, I have some weeds in my yard. Mike, could I help you with your weeds? Could I fix your weeds? Could I do something about your weeds? Could I jump over into your yard and clean up your weeds? Hey, codependents, raise your hand. Here we go. Yeah, it was rhetorical. Everyone's honest in here. That's what I love about Region. You know, it could be like all that stuff. Hands go up. Basically, what it's telling me is I'm responsible for what's in what? My yard. And Mike's responsible for what's in his yard. Now, weeds is funny, so here we go. You know what? Mike says something, and it triggers me. Very good. Here's the point. Mike needs to own if he speaks harshly, if he says passive-aggressive things, fair enough. But I got triggered. Mike, you triggered me. Who owns my emotions? Who owns whether or not I get triggered? Thanks, Mike. Have a seat. Give him a hand. Now you say, well, you know, I got this boss at work and they always said to this, it always gets me so mad, and I'm just so mad at the boss. Why do you get mad? Why have you given that person so much power over you? Why have you never regulated your emotions going on a path? It was trauma. Why have you not healed from your trauma? Ouch. Meaning this, if you live your whole life with the boundary coming up in the sense that what you're going to do is just cut people off, all you do is go from cutting this person off, cutting this person off, cutting this person off, but you're never what? Healing or growing yourself. Now, I train counselors, so I'll be teaching this pretty soon, but if you ever go to marriage counseling, Christian or not, Sue Johnson started it, but there's something called emotional focused therapy. I'm just going to talk for this for a second. This is even the secular world. Even they realize so much of what we call boundaries is horrible. But basically, with your relationships in your life, stage one would be stabilization. Assessment, alliance, tracking patterns within and between attachment frame. That's really geeky, it's really psychological, but what it's saying is, how do you attach to people? Well, I'm looking at how people attach to me. You're responsible for what's in your what? Yard. How do you attach? The next one up there is restructuring, connecting in new ways with self and reaching vulnerability for others, ways that restructure bonds. Once again, you're focused on who? You. And finally, number 3, practical problem solving, consolidating new ways of being with self and others. If you've ever been to marriage counseling or any sort of relationship counseling and somebody went through this, which is common, basically they're walking you through how you think, how you respond, how you react. But here's the reality. You cannot control the what? The other person. So here's what I was accused of. So let's get out of the psychology and just go to a very famous passage. And I was looking at it in the New Living Translation. I'll give you some of the verbiage. But it ends this passage ends with Paul saying, as much as lies within you, live peaceably with everyone. The lie you learn at home is I just cut people off. I end relationships. I ghost people. Is it not common? Okay. So Paul writes this. And I will give you the steps in like 2 or 3 minutes. Okay. These could be whole studies. But this is just one passage of Scripture. How can I learn not to cut people off and stay in relationships with them? So I'm going to tell you at the beginning, it's really hard. If it wasn't hard, everyone would do it. Fair enough? But this is the way Christ modeled. So here we go. Number 1, I talked about it last week. Renew your minds, both cognitive and emotional. Everyone say this out loud. I think wrong. And I'm deceived. There you go. First step. Kind of like an AA meeting. There you go. Say your name and we got it. Romans 12:3. Don't think too highly of yourselves. If you're in a conflict, you'll think very low of who? The other person, and very high of what? Yourself. New Living Translation just flat says it that way. Don't think too highly of yourself. If you tell a story about a conflict, who's the hero in your story if you're telling it to someone else? You are. You're one of two things always. You're the hero or the victim of the story. No one ever tells us, I want to tell you something that happened at work with my boss. I was totally at fault. Sometimes you do, you know what I'm saying? But for the most part, it didn't happen that way. I like this too. Use sober judgment. In the context, it literally says this, to evaluate yourself. What? I need sober judgment to evaluate other people. True. But in this context, it says you need to be thinking right to evaluate who? You. Next one after that is the spiritual gifts. Understand you need people in your life. You need community. Everyone who checks out from community is completely deceived in denial, thinking they can go it on their own. Church is boring. Yes, it is sometimes. And I worked for one. I get it. But I still need people. Paul said this to the Corinthians. The eye will say, I have no need of another part of the body. We give spiritual gifts tests to make people feel like they're involved. And I'm glad we do. That's cool. I'm glad. But you know what the real lie is? The real lie is I don't need other people. I need to figure out what my gift is. Hope you do. On your way to success. That's great. I'm not making fun of it. I am a little, but not too much. But you know what the obsession is? Not to use your gift. You need other people. That's the problem. 12:9-13, love with devotion, and it says, especially love those in need. See this all the time with parents. How do I teach my kid? I'm concerned about my kid. I want my kid to stay in church. I got news for you. If all your kids see in church is I show up to an attractional model and I am entertained by that, then when they walk away someday, it shouldn't surprise anybody. What do I need to stay in relationships? Where do you model for them to love those with hospitality in great need? That rarely happens on a Sunday morning. So all of a sudden they walk away from Christianity and they're like, well, I modeled it for them. If all you modeled was Sunday, that wasn't it. Next after that, live in harmony with enemies. He didn't say cut them off. He didn't say build a wall. He didn't say be done with them. Ouch. Live in harmony with enemies. And this is where he says practice empathy. Don't just sympathize with people, but when they mourn, you mourn with them. When they have joy, you have joy with them. Well, it's easier to have joy with people. No, it's easier to mourn with people because when people have really good things going on in their life, we'll be jealous of them. I say this all the time. I love my sisters, but if one told me they won the lottery, I'm so happy for you. That's the way we are. I'm just in my group. I'm glad somebody got a promotion. Me and my wife or me and my husband can't have children. I'm just so glad when our friends have another pregnancy. It's hard. Romans 12:17. Forgive, do not repay anyone evil for evil. Oftentimes, it's passive aggressiveness that cuts people off because we're trying to make them what? Pay. We're trying to inflict pain on them. We're trying to hurt them. But we all do it under the idea of, I'm just practicing boundaries. Boundaries are you learning to regulate your emotions and your triggers to be in relationships with difficult people. Because they're in a relationship with you and you're difficult too. Romans 12:18. As far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all men. With all men. And finally, do not seek revenge. The lie is I just cut this person off, cut this person off, cut this person off. Jeff, these people hurt me. Jeff, these people said things. These people take advantage of me. These things trigger me. All of those things are still in your what? Yard. Region is not for you to build a big wall and keep everyone out of your life. It's for you to live in a relationship with people that would actually be called your enemies. I was a junior in high school. I had a teacher for history. He had gone to a Christian college in Springfield, Missouri. Then he became an atheist. At graduation, you had to wear the colors, like the cap and gown from where you graduated. He hated it because he still had to wear the colors from a Christian organization. He was a blatant atheist. To the point he would mock God in our class. I remember the first time he wrote God on the board with a small g. It didn't take me much to realize, wow, he's kind of adversarial against my tradition of faith. He had a friend that was also on the staff at the high school I went to, and I've shared this before. His wife was a Christian. He used to tell stories about when friends from her church would come to their house and try to get him to come to church and win him to Christ. He would share this with us in high school. And he would make fun of them. I'm 16, 17 years old listening to those stories. We live in a world where pull me out of the class, put up a boundary, enclose me in my little prison so I don't have to experience people like that. One of them was greatly wounded, and one of them was a jerk. And they were two of the best teachers I ever had, who individually invested in me and taught me. Obviously, I didn't end up an atheist, and I still had my faith. But even at 16 and 17, I could maintain a relationship with them. Because if they made me mad in class, when they said things like that, whose job was it to regulate Jeff's emotions? Jeff's. And whose job was it to learn to love people that don't fit in my ideal world? Mine. And I wasn't getting out of the class anyway. I've told you about my dad. I went home and da-da-da-da-da. He said this, he said this, he said this. Really sorry about that. You better get good grades. Don't live your life cutting people off. Live your life by Romans learning to grow. Fair enough? Don't believe the lie you're safe when you cut people off. It takes all the growth away. All right, so tonight, I love working at Abundant Life, I really do. And we have a large staff. And everyone's good, I really mean that. But there's some people on our staff, exceptionally talented, and I would say strong leaders. Strong leaders in a lot of ways. Number one, what they model. Number two, their relationship ability. Number three, their vulnerability. Number four, I'll just say it, high degrees of intelligence and capacity. So one of the strongest leaders we have at Abundant Life has agreed to come and share her testimony tonight. So give it up for Kylie Masters.